Hey guys, welcome back to the House of Gouldians. So in a previous episode, we discussed the type of the bird in a lot of detail or model. But today I thought we would discuss a lot of the rest of the standard or detail of the standard because of the fact that it's show season. So internationally, Northern Hemisphere, I'm talking now, they're very much in the peak of their season, the show season. So the biggest shows are happening kind of now in early January. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's coming into our show season. It's a little bit early still, but the Breeders' Rung shows happen typically towards the middle and end of November. And then our main shows would be typically sort of February type scenario in the Southern Hemisphere. But more importantly, with it being 2023, it's the World Show. And that's why I wanted to discuss in a lot of detail today the show standard. I've deliberately not in the bird room, in an area where I had a nice blank wall that I can use for putting up photos and that as we go through the different aspects of the bird. I do apologize for my macaw. He gets rather excited when I'm in the room chatting, and he likes to have his say as well. So if I repeat myself, it's because I heard him scream while I was busy talking, like now. Anyway, so yeah, let's get stuck into it. First and foremost, let's talk about some prerequisites for the shows. Now, all shows require that your cage is clean and meets the requirements. Now, this is a typical example of a physical show cage, but yeah, you have the international one. The only real difference is that it has a clear front and it's got the lighting built into it for the videos and that kind of thing, so the judges can see the bird nicely. In the physical show cages, obviously, it wouldn't normally have lighting in it, although some countries do have lighting in them, but obviously you've got the bars. So that was the difference between the two. So you would need to have your birds in this type of cage, and more importantly, it needs to be clean and the cage needs to be in good condition. You say, why is that a prerequisite? What difference does it make? Look at it from a judge's perspective. You've now put in this bird, the cream is a crop of what you've bred for the last year, 2 years in the international birds case, or shows case. But now you go and you put it in a broken frame, or a dirty frame, or a damaged frame. Now, you wouldn't put up a prized piece of artwork like the Mona Lisa in a broken frame. So, take a little bit of time to make sure that your show cage not only meets the requirements, so it doesn't get qualified, but also it's in the right condition. Okay, so that's tip number one, because the judges do notice if the cage is filthy, or if there's marks or whatever, it's distracting. So I would look at that as well. Then, in terms of prerequisites, the international show in particular, it's a Breeders' Rung show. In other words, it's got to be this year's rings, the blue 2023 ring or last year's 2022 ring, based on the international ring colors. And that is in the show manual for it. Please pay attention, because in that particular show, you can't have rings on both legs. It's only allowed to have one ring, which is your official club ring, if you like, that stick to those colors. And that when you're catching your birds and separating them to do your show cage training, check that it's not missing things like a toenail or it's got a deformed foot or something, because it's going to cause it to be eliminated. All right. So that's some of the prerequisites. Another thing would be that the bird needs to be healthy. If the bird is sitting in a corner, puffed up, not moving, you can't expect the judges to be able to judge it properly, because they're not seeing all the sides of the bird. If it's puffed up, it also doesn't look good. So, condition is important, but health is critical. Okay, a sick bird will not be judged, bottom line, because we can't judge a sick bird. Okay, so it needs to have all its limbs and it needs to be healthy in order to be judged. And with that, and that's also why I put a picture of the box up in the first place. When you're entering shows, please make sure that you don't have sharp points in your show cage. I cannot tell you how often a bird's been disqualified because by the time it's got in front of the judge, it's gone and injured itself on a nail that's sticking into the box or something. And now there's blood all over the cage and the bird's got blood on its wing or on its foot or something. Okay. The bird cannot be judged if it's like that. It's going to be sent back to the bench. Or in the international case, that video is going to be passed. It's just not going to be judged. All right. So those are your prerequisites for your bird to be considered. Next, we now talk about the primary aspect of the bird. On all your Gouldian Finch standards, the primary focus is colour. Why? Because it's a colour bird first and foremost. I'll say it again. The colours of your bird is the most important aspect of a Gouldian finch. If the colour is wrong for the mutation or the markings are wrong, you cannot expect your bird to be in the top birds. That's not to say that the type is not important. A bad type bird will also not achieve a top mark. But your colour is first and foremost. Now, what do we mean? I'm going to go through from the head of the bird down to the tail of the bird, talking about the different colour. First, on the head, you've got the mask. Now, on a black bird, it's less applicable because it just needs to be even. And obviously, the line of the back of the mask needs to be concave, not convex. It mustn't come in towards the eye. But on the other two head colours, the red and the orange, particularly your hens, you need to pay attention to the fact that they have a full mask colour. This example, you'll see the hen only has colour on the top part of her mask. The bottom part is black. That is a fault. It's incorrect. The other side of it is that it mustn't be patchy. So if you've got different colour reds in the mask or different colour oranges in the mask, it's probably because it's missing feathers, because it's not that regular to have or common to have mask with patchiness. It's not a big area, so it's seldom that you see it, but it does happen. But in the other parts of the bird, we talk about patchiness, but in the head, it needs to be regular. And it mustn't have any missing feathers, and it mustn't be patchy, obviously, is what we're saying. And the colours pay attention to as well. A red-headed hen in particular can sometimes be extremely dark. I've got one hen that if I'm not paying attention, I actually miss her as a red-headed hen. I think she's a blackhead. That's how dark the red is. That is incorrect. If it's entered as a red-headed bird, you must see that it's a red-headed bird. So be wary of a red-headed hen that has a dark mask, because it's going to be penalised. With your orange, you've got different schools of thought around the world. Some judges tend to like a darker orange head, some like more of a yellowy coloured head, and that's okay, but it must be orange. All right. Then the band that goes around the back of your head. So if you looking at me with my beard, okay, I've got a patchy beard, but anyway, by what would be the sort of mid-ear and the ear covert on the bird, you'll find that sometimes on the orange and red heads is a step. It's a definite one thicker than the top part. It should go seamlessly around the back of the bird. It's going to get narrower from the bottom part, but it needs to not be a step. And secondly, it needs to be flowing. It mustn't be jagged, okay, because of either missing feathers or because it's actually a jagged line. It needs to be a smooth line that goes around the back. And like I said, alluded to earlier, it mustn't indent towards the eye for the international show. Very important. That's part of the mask markings and head markings that we look at when judging the head of the bird. While we're on the head, the other thing to remember is on a cock bird, the beak must be like china, essentially. It must be nice and white. It must not be gun grey or black like a hen that's in condition. If a cockbird has that, it is a fault. It is wrong. Okay. Obviously, depending on the mutation, the tip of the beak may be red, it might be orange, obviously depending on the genetics that are in the bird, but the base, the main portion of the beak, if you like, should be almost porcelain in look on a cockbird. All right, it must be clean, it must be smooth, but that comes to more condition that we'll discuss a little bit later. Continuing with colour, we now move to the nape or neck of the bird. In classic green-backed Gouldians, we're starting to see more and more yellow feathering in the neck starting to come onto the show bench. In South Africa, we actually have a mutation called a yellow nape, and that needs to go under any other colour. It is not a classic Gouldian. A classic Gouldian has the black band, it has the turquoise section, and then it has the nape, and the nape is green in a classic bird. Blue in a blue mutation, yellow in a yellow mutation. Okay, it should not have yellow feathering in a green bird. Okay, between that nape area and the head, black line, like I said, choose that turquoise band. In a cockbird, that mustn't be too thick that it's extending too far down that nape, but it also mustn't be too thin that it's barely visible. It must also be the right colour. We had a show recently where it was very, very pale, as you can see. That's the wrong colour. Okay, it's going to get penalised. It needs to be the correct turquoise. It also can't be too dark. In South Africa, we've got something called a dark factor Gouldian, and it also affects the leg colours of the bird. It is wrong. It is a mutation. It cannot be entered as a classic bird if it's like that. All right. So we've discussed now the nape and the head of the bird. We're now moving to the back and the chest. The back of the bird needs to be even in colour regardless of the mutation. So if it's a yellow bird, it must be even yellow. It mustn't be patchy like lime green and then yellow and then bright yellow. And no. Whatever the colour is for the mutation, so a yellow bird, it must be the same yellow throughout. Green bird, obviously green throughout. Cinnamon, it must be the same colour throughout. A blue, obviously blue along the back. If it's patchy, it could be that it's missing feathers, or it could be the colour pigment itself. But either way, it's a fault. So pay attention that it's evenly coloured. Brings me to the breast of the bird. Now, in terms of type, we talk about it having a full breast and all that kind of thing, and that we've discussed in previous videos. But in terms of colour, there's also an aspect that we look at on the breast of the bird. Once again, can't be patchy. Particularly your lilac birds, like you can see in this example, is prone to patchiness. Your purple as well can have it, and your white-breasted, unfortunately, sometimes you get brown feathers or cream feathers in between, or blue feathers in it. That is incorrect. It must be an even colour throughout the chest. The next thing you want on a cockbird, it must be laser cut. That's where we talk marking side. So if it blends in on the cock, that's a fault. The hen, you do get a bit of blending that happens. We understand that, particularly on your blues, it's very visible. But the more laser cut it is on, the better. And on a cockbird, it must be as if it's a laser cut line. You don't want a jagged line. You don't want a blending of colour. Okay, very important. And like we said, it needs to be not missing any feathers. That's also going to cause a patchiness. If it's a lilac-breasted Gouldian, pay attention to the colour of the lilac. If it's very pale, that it's an off-white, it's not a strong lilac. It's not going to do well. If it's very dark, it might look more like a purple-breasted bird. A lilac breast must be a lilac colour, not purple and not off-white. So you need that strength of colour, in other words, on the breast of the bird. Now, that's the back and the breast. We now move on to the wings of the bird. In this example, you can see a lot of blue in the wing. On the show that we looked at recently, and I've seen it on the physical shows last year and early part of this year as well. We're getting a lot of green birds, wild classic birds, if you like, that's having blue in the wing. It's incorrect. It must be an even green throughout, unless it is a yellow rump edged bird, and we'll discuss that in more detail now. But on the other mutations, you want as even tone of color as possible, whether it be a blue mutation, yellow mutation, mustn't have white feathers, for example, and then obviously your green must be pure green. So that's the wing portion of the bird. Obviously, the flight feathers, they need to be the correct color for that mutation. So on your yellow birds, you would generally have white tips, whereas on a lot of your other mutations, it should be black. Okay, pay attention to that as well, because if it's the wrong coloring, that also counts against it because the colors are incorrect. Okay, so quite important that. Moving further down the bird, we talk about the belly of the bird. And there, once again, moral of the story, no patchiness. So that yellow should be as even as possible. You don't want light yellow and then dark yellow or white or something like that. While we are talking about the belly of the bird, typically when you see the white feathering around the vent, it's a sign of obesity. Make sure that if your birds are slightly or leaning towards the obese side, put them on austerity now. No soft food. Put them on in the biggest flight cage you have for a couple of days to try and burn off some of that fat. And cut the seed down to the basic seed. Nothing fatty like hemp seed or Niagara stuff that has a high fat content, because you need to try and get rid of that excess weight. It causes a bulge by the vent, and that causes, because of that bulge, it causes the feathers to be ruffled, and you're seeing white, which is what we're talking about now as well. So you don't want that. All right. It's going to count against you, that obesity, in two ways, because one, it's going to count on the condition side. Two, it's going to count on the colouring side, because it's going to cause the white sort of feathering or aspects of the feather to be visible. All right, so we've discussed the belly of the bird. Now we talk about the rump of the bird. Now, on a classic Gouldian, you're wanting a fairly dark blue, not a very pale blue. Once again, it varies from mutation to mutation. Obviously, a yellow bird's different. A yellow rump bird needs to have a yellow rump. Can't have a blue rump, obviously. But with that, coming back to the wings, is where you get the edging on the feathering on the wing. So that's allowed, even though normally we look for an evenness of color on the wings. On a yellow rump edge, you will have that edging, and that's part of that mutation, so it actually has to be there. All right, but in terms of that rump, we're needing the blue to be correct on the classic. Obviously, it's dependent on the mutation. All right. While we're on the rump, the markings come into effect once again. We want a scalloping effect, and that is where the edge of each feather essentially has a white edge to it, and that's what causes that scalloping. If that's missing, it's a fault, and we're seeing a lot of it on the bench, so be aware of it and pick your birds accordingly. It needs to have that marking on the rump of the bird. Last color aspect I want to talk about is the feet, and the feet on a dark factor bird will have quite a lot of dark pigmentation along the front edge of the leg, or the shin, if you like, of the bird. So be aware of that, because that is a mutation. A normal classic Gouldian, it should be basically that pinky skin color. It shouldn't be have dark pigment in it. So from a color perspective, it would be incorrect if it does. Now, that we've discussed the colors of the bird and the markings of the bird, I wanted to chat to you about the condition aspects of the bird. A lot of the birds on the shows get penalized because of things that could have been eliminated or sorted out by the breeder ahead of the show. One, if the beak is too long, as in it's overgrown on the top mandible. You can trim that. Sometimes it's a sign of illness. So if, a sick bird shouldn't be on the show in the first place. But if there's a slight bit of growth there, that can be sorted out by the breeder by simply trimming the beak when you catch it to put it in your training cage. The next aspect is scale on either the feet or the beak. You don't want any scaling. So on the feet in particular, if you take a tiny bit of Vaseline and when you catch the bird to put it in your training cages, put some Vaseline on the legs, and if you rub gently, a lot of that scaling will come off. You do that 2 or 3 times and it will go away. One thing you need to be careful though is that you don't get Vaseline on the feathers of the bird, because obviously that's going to affect the feathering and they're not going to look good when it comes to show day. So be careful not to get Vaseline from your fingers onto the feathers, only on the legs of the bird. The other thing is, like you trim the beak, trim the nails. I saw it on the show recently, and here's the example where the bird's toenails are long. It then means that the bird can't grip the perch properly. It looks uncomfortable. The bird's not relaxed on the perch because it's battling to actually grip properly. It counts against it from both the condition side, that the nails aren't clipped, but it also counts against it from the point of view that it's going to affect your attitude on the perch. Okay, so you need to look at the feet, the nails in particular, and make sure they're the correct length and that the feet are in good condition in terms of not having a scale or anything like that on it. Also, while you're looking and cleaning the feet, so if your feet do get, the bird's feet do get dirty in the training cage, when you transfer it to the show cage, bathe them in a little bit of warm water, just make sure it's not too hot. And if you rub, that dirt will come off. But at the same time, pay attention to dirt on the ring itself, because quite often you see the feet are clean, but now the ring's falsy. It's been soiled with feces and that kind of thing, and that doesn't look good. So just try and make sure that that's neat and tidy as well. Otherwise, it counts against your bird. Now, we've spoken about the colour and the patterns of the bird and all that kind of thing and the markings, and we started discussing condition. One of the other things that counts a lot against the bird is if it has the wrong attitude at the time of filming, in the case of the international show, or on your show bench in your normal cages when the judge is judging it. And that comes from a lack of training, generally speaking, where you've taken the bird straight out your cage, you've shoved it in the show cage, you've taken your film or you've submitted it to the show, and the bird is as nervous as can be, and that causes things like dropped wings, where now the bird's stressed, the beak is open because the bird's stressed, it's not sitting nicely, it's jumping all over the place and fluttering around. Well, how are we as judges supposed to judge the bird if we can't look at it properly because it's jumping all over the place? The reverse is true as well. Sometimes some birds, when they're stressed, they freeze like statues, and if it's not moving from perch to perch, guess what? We can't see all sides of the bird. So how can we judge it? Okay, so training, I cannot emphasize enough. You should have your birds basically in the cage today or tomorrow, so they've got a good 2 weeks worth of training to do before you actually entering them in the actual show itself. You can get away with less. It depends on your environment. If they're coming out of an aviary, you need 2 weeks, bottom line. If they're in smaller cages, they're in a bird room, they see you a lot, they'll be less nervous, but you still need to have them in the training cage for a while before you actually try and put the birds on show, just so that they can get used to where their water is, where their food is, be relaxed. It must basically feel like they're home by the time they entered into the show, and therefore that they're completely relaxed and they're behaving, at least acting in a way that is true to a Gouldian's correct behavior. All right. So training is critically important as well. We had a show where the moment we approached as judges, the bird dropped to the floor. It wouldn't perch. Now, we cannot judge that bird if it's sitting on the floor. Okay, and that's purely because of a training issue. And some birds, they never relax in the show cages properly. Unfortunately, that bird's not a show bird. But a little bit of training goes a long way. And a lot of the birds that were penalized in the recent show, was where a lot of these examples come from, was actually because of a lack of training on the birds. I cannot stress it enough. You're going to lose a point or two, and that makes a difference between a good bird and a great bird is that kind of thing, and obviously condition and all the other aspects that we've spoken about today. Touching briefly in terms of type or model. Remember, we're looking for a nice round head, not an arrowhead like this, or a flat head. Very important. Also, that line over the head needs to ideally flow down the back. If you've got a hump by the rump or a hump by the back, that bird is not ideal because it doesn't have that nice strong back line or straight back line. Also, if the bird is sitting wrong and its head is too far up, it causes a dip by the neck. Okay, that is also a problem. Okay, we want that nice straight back line ideally. And then the front end, remember I've told this many times, needs to be well rounded. Some areas of the world, they have a squared off model or type. So it's not really going to count against you if it's squared off unless that vent is showing to be obese, because then that squared off look is probably because of obesity. So you need to consider that when you're picking your birds. But ideally you want a nice rounded breast. What we don't want to see is this long, thin bird. Okay, an elongated bird that looks like a pencil is not a good show bird. Okay, and that's where the type side comes in. So if everything else is correct and that type's not correct, your bird's not going to end up being the top bird in the show. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the fundamentals. Also, you're looking for a bird that sits at 45 to 60 degrees on the perch. If it's lying on the perch, generally it's also a sign that the bird is too big, it's overweight, and as a result it's trying to rest its body on the perch to get relief. Okay, it's a bad sign. So if the bird is sitting correctly, its position on perch is what we call it in the standard, then it's also a sign that the bird is in good health and it's not obese. All right, so I hope those things have kind of cleared up a lot of the sort of aspects of a good show bird. I wish you all the absolute best for the World Show. It's a fantastic show in that no matter where you are in the world, if you're part of a club that is registered to partake, you can partake and compete against the entire world. We've got the NFSS from America that registered this year for the first time. We've got New Zealand. We've got Czech Republic. This year we've got South Korea that's joined. And as a result, the show is growing every time we have it. And really, it's the only truly international show that you can participate in, just because of the nature of the show. In physical shows, unfortunately, there's a lot of border restrictions and quarantines and nightmares, so it's not an option to have physical birds on the show bench. The show has had criticism because guys say, but it's videos. But remember, everyone is on the same playing field. We're all entering 45-second to 60-second videos. It's fair because everyone's doing the same. Everyone's cage is required to have lighting. We've specified the lighting. We're all on an even playing field. The length of the video is 45 seconds to 60 seconds for a reason, because we have to get through a lot of birds. But at the same time, it doesn't help if your bird hasn't been trained and it's sitting in a corner and we don't get to see both sides of it. So it's your fault as a breeder if you submit a video where your bird's not moving. Obviously, that bird is not going to be able to be judged properly compared to a bird that's moving around correctly. So pick your time correctly. You might have filmed a bird for 3 minutes. We only need 60 seconds. Or between 45 and 60 seconds. Pick where you see your bird at its best. And provided when you've filmed the bird, your phone is stationary, it's not doing this, the video is great. It gives us what we need as judges to evaluate your bird. Good luck. I'm looking forward to seeing your birds. I hope this video has helped you. Please give me your comments in the comment section below. Subscribe if you're not subscribed already to the channel, because we really, this is a platform for clubs from all over the world to showcase what they're doing. We've had episodes showcasing what the Spanish clubs are doing, what the Bahrain club's doing, and all of that. And we're going to have more clubs in that showcase. So it's really a great platform to learn and to see what other people are doing from all over the world.